everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The girl with the knife at Jack in the Box. When I was around 11 years old, my family made a move from Tennessee to Texas because my dad had landed a new job and we needed to relocate quickly. At the time, my brother and I were homeschooled, which made the transition smoother since there was no concern about switching schools or falling behind. We ended up living with my aunt and uncle temporarily while we got settled, and honestly, it was a lot of fun. Our families were close back then, and all the cousins got along well. My cousin Peyton and I were especially inseparable. We did everything together. It was the kind of childhood where small adventures felt massive, and we soaked in the joy of being around loved ones all the time. One of the biggest delights for us was having access to Jack in the Box again, a fast food place we missed dearly while living in Tennessee. We were all born in Texas, and Jack in the Box was something of a nostalgic treat for us, having gone without it for so long. One evening, our parents decided to go out to dinner together, leaving all of us kids at home. They gave us clear instructions: stay inside, lock the doors, and don't leave for any reason. Being kids though, we felt bold and clever, and we decided that rules were more like suggestions. Craving ice cream and candy, we devised what we thought was the perfect plan. My older sister had access to my dad's car, which had been left at the house, and with her behind the wheel, Peyton and I jumped in, planning to make a quick trip to the store and back without anyone finding out. We started out with the intention of just picking up some sweet treats, but the lure of hot food soon overpowered our craving for cold desserts. Jack in the Box sounded way better. We drove toward the restaurant, chatting and laughing, caught up in the thrill of being out when we weren't supposed to be, thinking we were being harmless rebels for the night. When we pulled into the drive-thru at Jack in the Box, the line was long, too long for our impatient little group. We figured it would be quicker to just go inside, place our order, and get out before anyone realized we had left the house. So we parked the car and stepped into the brightly lit fast food place, not expecting anything more than greasy tacos and curly fries. But as we stood there near the entrance, everything changed. A girl caught our attention. She looked around our age or a little older, but there was something off about her. She was wearing winter clothes, heavy layers, a jacket, boots, even though the weather didn't call for it. She approached the counter and asked for a water cup, which didn't seem out of the ordinary until she filled it with soda instead. I remember the guy at the register giving her a strange look, but not saying anything, maybe just trying to get through his shift. We watched her out of simple curiosity, like nosy kids often do, not realizing that something much darker was about to unfold. As she finished her drink and turned to leave, something about her struck me. Her eyes were wide, wild almost, as if she had just seen something terrifying or was about to do something unthinkable. Then I saw it. Clutched tightly in her hand was a large butcher's knife, gleaming slightly under the overhead lights. My heart dropped. I couldn't breathe for a second. Peyton gasped beside me, and my sister froze in place. The girl, with the same unblinking stare, walked right past us and exited the restaurant. We were stunned. Part of me wanted to run, and part of me just couldn't move. After she left, we all started talking at once, voices hushed and frantic, trying to convince ourselves it wasn't as bad as it looked. We placed our order like everything was normal, but there was a tension in the air we couldn't shake. As we drove away, bags of food in hand, we saw her again. She was walking across the street toward the CVS on the other side, completely unbothered by the traffic. Cars honked and swerved, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even look. It was like she was in another world, untouchable, unafraid. We watched for a moment, then drove off, deciding that it wasn't our problem. We parked somewhere nearby and sat in the car, eating our tacos and laughing nervously about how crazy the night had been. But then the sirens started. At first just one or two, then a swarm. We saw dozens of flashing police lights swarming the CVS parking lot. Instinctively, We drove back over to see what was happening. An officer stopped us at the edge of the parking lot, asking a few questions. We told him what we saw. Just a girl at Jack in the Box with a knife. His face darkened. He thanked us and let us go. We got home in a daze. The house was quiet, the other kids watching TV or playing games. We tried to act normal, but something felt off, like the air itself was heavier. Later that night, our moms called the three of us into one of the bedrooms. Calmly but firmly, they asked us what we had done that evening. I think we lied, or at least tried to, but it was pointless. They already knew. Apparently someone had posted about us on Facebook, calling us heroic girls for helping with a dangerous situation. It felt surreal. All we had done was answer a few questions, but then they told us what really happened. That same girl had walked into the CVS, grabbed a woman by the hair, and held a knife to her throat for several terrifying minutes before the police could safely intervene. No one had been hurt, thank God, but it could have ended so much worse. We sat there, listening, unable to process the full weight of what we had nearly stepped into. If we had spoken to her, if we had bumped into her the wrong way, if she had chosen us instead of the woman at CVS, it could have been us. One wrong move, one unlucky second, and our innocent night out could have turned into a nightmare. I thought about how close she had walked past us, how tightly she gripped that knife, how wild her eyes looked. She wasn't just a girl looking for a drink. She was someone unraveling, someone on the edge, and we, without realizing it, had walked right into her path. Even now, years later, I think about that night. I think about what might have happened if we had stayed a moment longer, or if she had decided to use that knife at the restaurant instead of crossing the street. There's a lot I don't remember about that night. The exact order of events, the names of all the kids who were with us, even what food we ordered. But I will never forget the way that girl looked. The stillness in her steps, the absence of emotion on her face, the way she walked straight through the chaos of traffic, like she was untouchable. It taught me something. Not just about danger, but about how thin the veil really is between an ordinary evening and a life-altering experience. We went out for tacos and came back with a memory that never left. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about ghosts or monsters. They're about real people walking among us, carrying something dark inside. As an adult, I try not to dwell on it, but I do think it made me more cautious, more aware of the world. It was a warning, a whisper from fate saying, "Be careful. You never know what's lurking right around the corner." I still eat Jack in the Box sometimes. I still laugh with my cousins, but a part of me always remembers that night, the girl in the winter coat, the quiet intensity of it all. And I remember how lucky we were, because we could have been a headline. We could have been the story on the news. Instead, we just went home, sat in our beds, and listened to our parents explain how close we had come to something far more terrifying than we understood at the time. Story 2. The Pizza Delivery Stalker. There was a time in my life when I used to order pizza almost religiously. It wasn't just a casual craving now and then. It was a routine, a comfort, something that grounded me after long days. I had a local place just a few miles from my home, and the food was always solid, the deliveries prompt, and the experience unremarkable in the best way. But things shifted the day they hired a new delivery guy. I didn't notice anything immediately unusual about him. He looked ordinary enough, polite at first glance, just another face in the revolving door of part-time workers. The first few deliveries he made to my house seemed fine. Maybe he lingered a second too long at the door, or tried to strike up unnecessary conversation, but I brushed it off. People can be friendly, right? But little signs began stacking up, and soon it was hard to ignore the sense that something wasn't right. One night he showed up with my pizza, and instead of handing me the box and leaving, he stood in the doorway and casually suggested we eat together, as if we were friends, as if he belonged there. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was making some sort of weird joke, but his expression didn't change. He was serious, firm. There was a hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with food. I declined, of course, and closed the door on him. After that incident, I stopped ordering from that place altogether. I figured avoiding contact was the best course of action. Still, I wasn't overly paranoid. My home had a good security system. I had a large dog, and I lived in a relatively quiet area just outside the city. I told myself that whatever that guy's deal was, it was over. But about 2 months later, something happened that changed everything. One night, just as the first snow of the season had blanketed the ground, I heard a strange noise, scratching, coming from the side of my house. It didn't sound like an animal rummaging or a branch brushing against the siding. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. But living near wooded areas, I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray looking for warmth. I let my dog out to investigate. He's no small companion, 120 pounds of muscle and fur, a king shepherd with a deep bark and sharp instincts. He bolted off into the darkness the moment I opened the door, and within seconds, his barking turned into something else entirely, a terrifying chorus of snarls, yelps, and then human screams. Loud, panicked, agonized screams. My blood ran cold. I ran outside, shouting for my dog. He came back quickly, tail high and alert, and I grabbed the phone to call the police. They arrived not long after, their flashlights cutting through the snow-dusted yard. When they reached the side of the house, they found blood, more than anyone was comfortable with, and shoe prints, partially smeared from a struggle. It was clear someone had tried to pry open my window, and my dog had stopped him. But the real confirmation came when we reviewed the security footage. There he was, caught on camera, a man crouched near my window, using a tool to try to force it open. My dog rushed him, leapt at him, and brought him down hard. The footage showed a brutal scuffle before the man scrambled to his feet and limped away. He didn't make it far. Another camera positioned near my driveway caught his license plate as he hobbled to his car and drove off. The police traced the plate to the hospital where, sure enough, he had checked in with a severe bite wound on his leg and another on his backside. When the officers questioned him, his story was flimsy at best. He claimed he had just wanted to surprise his girlfriend. But I don't have a boyfriend. I never had anyone over. I live alone. And I hadn't given anyone reason to think otherwise. When they showed me a picture of the man, my stomach dropped. It was him. The pizza guy. The one who had tried to invite himself in. The one I had brushed off as a harmless creep. But it wasn't over yet. When the police searched his car, the truth unraveled in the most horrifying way. Inside they found rope, duct tape, a camera, and a knife. Not just tools of harm, but tools of intent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a lonely man misreading signals. This was a stalker, a predator, someone who had watched, waited, and planned. The worst part wasn't the close call, or the fact that he had returned after weeks of silence. It was realizing that someone I had casually interacted with had decided I was his target. It shook me to my core. The footage, the evidence, the blood, it all pointed to how close I had come to being dragged into something unimaginable. I stopped sleeping for a while after that. Even with the security system, even with the police report, even knowing he was caught, it didn't matter. The fear lived on. People often joke about stalkers or obsessive exes like they're plot devices in a thriller. But this wasn't a movie. This was real. And it made me reevaluate everything. I stopped going out after dark. I adopted another dog. I put locks on every window, reinforced the doors, and checked the security system twice a day. And I started to understand something I never had before. How fragile the sense of safety can be. How quickly the familiar can turn into a nightmare. It's easy to think of yourself as too smart, too cautious, too ordinary to be targeted. But predators don't always look for flashy victims. Sometimes they just choose someone nearby, someone accessible, someone who happened to order pizza on the wrong night. I still think about that moment when I opened the door and he invited himself in, about the confidence in his voice, the entitlement. I think he had already decided back then that I was going to be part of his life, that I didn't have a choice. I don't know how many times he might have come near my house without me knowing. I don't know if he watched me from the woods or followed me from work. But I do know this: if I hadn't let my dog out that night, if I hadn't taken the noise seriously, I might not be here to tell this story. My dog saved my life, and the cameras helped prove it. But the unease never quite leaves. It lives in the quiet moments when I hear a creak in the hall, or when the wind rattles the windows. The police told me I was lucky, that most people don't get that kind of warning, that the rope and tape meant he was prepared for more than just a scare. They didn't tell me what would happen to him after the arrest. I never followed up. Maybe I didn't want to know. I just wanted to close that chapter, but closing it mentally proved harder than locking a door. I try to live normally again. I go for walks in daylight. I talk to neighbors a little more, but every so often, I check the locks 3 times before bed. I turn on every light before stepping into a room. I scan every delivery face a little longer than I used to, because I know better now. I know how quickly something harmless can turn terrifying. So if you've ever had a gut feeling, even a small one, listen to it. If someone's behavior seems off, take it seriously. It doesn't matter if they deliver food or smile politely. Bad intentions don't always wear an obvious mask. Sometimes they show up with a pizza box and pretend to be friendly. I was lucky. My dog was alert. My cameras caught everything. But next time, someone might not be so fortunate, and all it takes is one misstep, one unlocked door, one person too polite to say no, leave. I share this not to scare anyone but to remind you, protect your space. Your instincts matter. And sometimes, the scariest story doesn't begin with a scream. It starts with a doorbell and ends with a truth that's hard to sleep with. Story 3. The Man in the Shadows with the Flash. A few years ago, when I was 17, I attended a community college located on the outskirts of my hometown. Since my parents both worked full-time jobs and my siblings were too young to drive, I had no choice but to take an 1.5-hour long bus ride each day. The ride itself wasn't terrible. It gave me time to decompress, listen to music, or let my mind wander before and after class. Despite being in the outskirts, the area was surprisingly busy. Strip malls, apartment buildings, fast food joints. It had everything. But at night, the energy changed. It quieted in a way that made every shadow feel heavier, and on this particular evening I found myself walking into one of the eeriest encounters of my life. That day, I had absent-mindedly left my phone behind at the college library. It wasn't until I got home that I realized it was missing. Using my brother's phone, I called a friend who worked the late shift at the campus library. He confirmed he had found it and offered to bring it to me after his shift. But since he lived closer to the college, I told him not to worry, that I would meet him there instead. I didn't think much of it. I knew the area well and figured I'd be fine. It was late enough that the sky was beginning to darken, but not so late that I felt unsafe. Still, when I got off the bus, something felt different. The air felt still. The usual noise of passing cars, footsteps, and voices had dwindled to near silence. I clutched my brother's phone tighter and picked up my pace. The walk from the bus stop to the library was only 4 blocks, but every footstep felt unusually loud on the pavement. As I turned a corner, a sudden flash of light caught my attention. It came from the right, from the shadows, just past a row of empty storefronts. At first I thought it was the flicker of a motion sensor light, or someone testing a camera flash. But then I saw him. Standing half in the dark, half illuminated by the dim street lamp, was a man. He looked out of place, like someone who had been lifted from a sleazy late-night movie and dropped into reality. He was balding, wearing sunglasses, at night, and a loud tourist-style shirt left unbuttoned halfway, revealing his chest. What unnerved me more than his appearance was the fact that he was holding his phone up and had just taken a picture of me. We were no more than 10 feet apart, and for a moment I froze. I stared at him. He stared back. The phone still in his hand, still pointed at me. I quickly scanned the street. There was a car nearby, parked with its windows blacked out and no license plate. It was facing the wrong direction on the road. My heart was thudding as possibilities raced through my mind. I could cross the street and run to the library. I could turn around and head home, or I could do what my adrenaline-charged brain decided on. Confront him. I know it wasn't the safest choice, but I was young. I was angry, and I didn't want to let this man think I was afraid. I marched up and demanded to know what he was doing. He looked startled. It was as if he hadn't expected me to speak up. He mumbled something about just standing there, but I knew what I saw. I told him I had seen him take a picture of me. He denied it. claimed I must be imagining things. He even chuckled nervously, saying, "Why would I take a picture of you?" At that moment I did something bold. I asked to see his gallery. I know, it was risky. He could have reacted violently, or worse. But to my surprise, he slowly unlocked his phone and opened the photo gallery, and there it was. A blurry image of me taken from across the street. My stomach flipped. Before I could speak, something else caught my attention. A car door slammed. The same car I had noticed earlier. It wasn't empty. Someone was inside. My instincts finally screamed loud enough for me to listen. I turned and bolted toward the college campus, not daring to look back. I could hear footsteps behind me at first, sharp and urgent, but then the sound of a car engine turning over filled the air. They were trying to follow me. The car had to make a U-turn to face the right direction, which gave me just enough time to sprint toward the brightly lit entrance of the library. My friend opened the door the moment he saw me. I was shaking, nearly in tears, trying to explain what happened. He locked the doors behind me, and we called the police together. We waited there, peeking out the windows, but the man and his car were gone, vanished. The police came and took my statement, but without a clear plate or more detailed descriptions, they couldn't do much. I don't think they truly believed me either. They were polite, but there was a certain look in their eyes, like they thought I was just spooked by nothing. My mum picked me up that night. I remember clinging to her in the car, trying not to cry. I didn't tell her the whole story. I just said I had a bad feeling, that some guy made me uncomfortable, but the truth clung to me in the days that followed. I kept replaying that moment when I saw the flash, the dead-eyed stare, and the blacked-out car parked just too conveniently close. I couldn't help but wonder, what if I hadn't confronted him? What if I had followed him instead, curious? What if the car hadn't needed to turn around? Would I be writing this now? Or would I be another face on a missing persons flyer? Another story with no ending? Since that day, I carry pepper spray and a flashlight in my bag. I never walk alone at night without being on high alert. I don't wear headphones when I'm in unfamiliar areas. I don't assume good intentions from strangers anymore. It might seem like an overreaction, but once you come that close to something sinister, the world never feels as safe again. I learned that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind a camera flash, behind sunglasses at night, behind the smirk of someone pretending they mean no harm. And if you ignore it, if you don't trust your gut, you might not get a second chance. Looking back, I'm proud of myself for standing my ground, even if it was risky. But I'm more grateful that I ran when I did. That car was waiting for something, or someone, and I truly believe that if I had hesitated, the outcome would have been tragic. My friend never saw the man again. The library didn't catch anything on its cameras, and the case never went further. To this day, I wonder who he was, what he wanted, and how many others he might have followed before or after me. I may never know, but I do know one thing. Something protected me that night. Whether it was fate, instinct, or just dumb luck, I'm here, and that's more than I can say for some people who find themselves face to face with a stranger and don't get away in time. Story 4. The Faceless Children and the Cowboy on the Porch. It all began about 2 years ago when my little cousin Jaden was just 4 years old. Her family had recently moved into a new house and had been excitedly renovating it room by room. At first, everything was perfectly normal. The house was bright, the walls echoed with laughter, and the creaky floors seemed to carry a sense of new beginnings. But after a few weeks, things started to shift. It wasn't anything overtly alarming at first, just little moments that made the adults glance at each other and wonder. The change began subtly, but then Jaden started speaking about things that no one could explain. One afternoon, completely out of the blue, she looked up at her mom and said she could see 2 kids in her room. They didn't have faces, she said. Their skin was smooth and featureless, and they had no arms either, just blank, eerie outlines where their features should be. At first, my aunt thought Jaden was simply imagining things. Kids have vivid imaginations, after all, and she figured maybe Jaden had watched something she shouldn't have, or had a dream she couldn't quite shake. But over the next few days, Jaden kept bringing them up. She wasn't afraid at first. She told us that the boy and girl just wanted to play. She even described them in more detail. The girl wore a white dress. The boy had a red cap. She would laugh and talk as if they were really there, like she was having full conversations. It was unnerving, sure, but still not quite enough to cause alarm. My aunt figured she'd grow out of it, but then things escalated. Jayden began waking up in the middle of the night, screaming. She would cry inconsolably, saying that the kids were scaring her now, that they were trying to pull her toward the corner of the room, that they wanted her to follow them. It was heartbreaking to watch. My aunt tried everything, night lights, lullabies, new bedtime routines, but nothing helped. The nightmares continued. Jayden began drawing pictures of the faceless kids. Always two, always standing at the same corner of her room. And then, one day, she said something that chilled us all to the bone. She said the children were scared too, not of her, but of someone else. A man, an old man in a cowboy hat and boots. She said he stood outside on the porch. He never came inside, but he would watch through the windows. She called him the mean man. She said he scared her more than anything. She said the children didn't like him either, that they would try to hide when he showed up, but they couldn't stop him from coming to the porch. Only the porch. He wasn't allowed inside. That one detail was repeated every time she spoke of him. It was as if she knew there was an invisible line he couldn't cross. At first, my aunt and uncle dismissed this, thinking it was just another layer of the story. But one night, during dinner, they all heard it. Heavy footsteps outside, on the wooden boards of the front porch. The sound was unmistakable. Thud. Thud. My uncle stood up and walked to the door, but when he opened it, there was no one there. Nothing but the faint smell of dust and old wood in the night air. When he came back in, confused and a little uneasy, Jayden calmly looked up from her food and said, "It's the meat man. He's standing at the door. He's watching us eat." The room went silent. My aunt's fork froze mid-air. My uncle tried to laugh it off, but there was no humor in it. The air felt heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. And then Jayden added softly, "It's okay. He can't come inside." They never saw anyone. No one else heard the footsteps again. But from that night on, the entire mood of the house shifted. My aunt started leaving lights on in the hallways. My uncle checked the doors twice before bed. Jayden refused to sleep in her room unless someone was with her. And she stopped talking about the children altogether. It was as if they had vanished, or she had learned not to mention them anymore. But every once in a while, she would pause in the middle of a sentence or game, glance toward the front windows, and frown. It was always the same expression, like she was waiting for someone to appear. After a few more months of subtle disturbances and sleepless nights, the family decided to move. They never made a big announcement. They just packed up one weekend and left quietly. And after they left, Jayden never spoke of the faceless children again. My aunt did some research after they moved. She was curious, unsettled, maybe looking for closure. What she found wasn't much, but it was enough. Records showed that an older man had once lived in the house. He had a reputation in the neighborhood for being cold, unfriendly. He wore a cowboy hat, always. Neighbors remembered the boots, the grim demeanor, and he had died on the property years before, alone on that very porch. No reports of children, though. No lost siblings, no accidents or tragedies. Just him, the kids, whoever or whatever they were, remained a mystery. Maybe they were just fragments of Jayden's imagination. Maybe not. But the timing, the consistency of her descriptions, the fear in her eyes, it all painted a picture that didn't feel made up. It felt like she had seen something we couldn't. To this day, I've never asked Jayden about it. She's older now, and she seems to have no memory of that chapter of her life. Or maybe she does, and she's chosen to forget. Either way, I don't bring it up. Some things are better left in the past. But every once in a while, I'll drive past the street where that house still stands, and I can't help but slow down as I pass it. The porch is still there, weathered and sun-bleached. The boards creak when the wind moves just right, and I wonder if the mean man is still out there, watching, waiting, bound to the edge of a house he can never enter, still scaring children who don't yet know they're too young to be imagining things that real. I've heard plenty of ghost stories over the years. I've read about cold spots and flickering lights, shadows and whispers in the dark, but none of them have ever stuck with me the way this one has. Maybe because it wasn't my story. Maybe because Jaden was so young, so innocent, and yet so sure of what she saw. That kind of certainty, coming from a child, has a weight that's hard to dismiss. I believe she saw something. Whether it was ghosts, memories trapped in the walls, or something more sinister, something older. I don't know, but I do believe this. Not all spirits come inside. Some stay on the edges, watching, and even when we leave, sometimes they don't. There's something about the idea of a ghost trapped on a porch that haunts me more than any spirit lurking in a basement. It's the waiting, the presence just outside the boundary, something that watches, always watches, but never crosses the line. Maybe that's what made the house feel so wrong in the end. Not what was inside, but what was just outside. Close enough to feel, far enough to doubt. Whatever the truth may be, the house now belongs to someone else. A new family lives there, unaware of the stories that once filled those rooms. I hope it stays that way. I hope the mean man has finally found his peace. But if not, I hope the new owners never let their children play too close to the windows. Story 5. The woman in the basement who wasn't there. My grandmother's house was the kind of place you feel long before you see it. My grandma had spent her entire life in that house, raising my father there, watching her grandkids crawl through its corners. She was the heart of our family, a movie buff who passed her love of old black and white films on to me, while my sister had always been closer to our maternal grandparents, who passed away when we were young. I spent most of my childhood following Grandma through the house, helping her jar preserves in the basement, listening to stories about how the town used to be. But in 2007, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. Crohn's disease and leukemia had taken their toll, and the house, like our hearts, felt a little emptier without her in it. After her passing, my father inherited the home, but rather than selling it, he allowed my sister and her new husband to move in and take over the payments. It was a way to keep the house in the family and ease the burden of the mortgage. We all came together to help clear out my grandma's belongings. We combed through her old clothes, boxed up her records and movie tapes, and sorted through decades of memories. Everything except the basement. No one really wanted to go down there. It wasn't that it was sinister. It was just cluttered and cold, filled with mason jars, dusty canning equipment, and a musty smell of age. My sister and her husband lived in the house for a while, and during that time they started to notice things. Nothing too major at first. Just little sounds, soft creaks, doors that didn't stay closed. She'd mention it in passing, half laughing, half serious, but I always shrugged it off. When they became pregnant, they decided the house was too old to raise a baby in. The insulation upstairs was terrible, hot in the summer, freezing in the winter. So they moved, and I moved in. At first it was just me and the 2 cats, but later my girlfriend joined me. The house was quiet again, and I wasn't the superstitious type. My girlfriend, on the other hand, was more sensitive to those things. She would tell me she heard footsteps upstairs, felt watched while brushing her teeth, or saw shadows move in the corners of her eyes. I always had some sort of logical explanation. The house was old. Cats made noise. Our minds filled in the blanks. But I'll admit there was something off about the basement. We didn't go down there much. When we did, the air always felt a little colder than it should have. Then came the night it all changed. I was working the night shift at a shop just down the road. It was around 9:30 p.m. when I got a text from my girlfriend. At first, I was excited, half hoping it was a flirty message. But when I opened it, I saw a picture of our 2 cats perched stiffly on the bed, ears forward, both staring at the open door with intense focus. The message read, "Someone's in the basement. Come home now." I didn't even respond. I grabbed my keys, bolted out the back, and was home in under a minute. My heart was racing as I pulled into the driveway. The front door was locked, so I used the key and burst inside, calling her name. She met me in the hallway, visibly shaken, whispering that something was downstairs. I grabbed a handgun we kept in the closet and told her to call the police. Then, slowly I made my way toward the basement stairs. The closer I got, the more intense the noise became. It sounded like something, or someone, was throwing things around. Clanging metal. The sound of shelves crashing, boxes falling. I thought maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside, but then I saw the basement lights were already on. The idea of a raccoon switching on a light seemed ridiculous. My hand tightened around the pistol. I moved slowly down the stairs, my feet hitting each one with measured force. The sounds had stopped. Complete silence now. I reached the bottom, heart pounding. I cleared every corner of the basement with the gun raised, ready for anything, but there was nothing. No signs of anyone. No overturned shelves. No boxes out of place. No broken glass. It looked exactly the same as always. Everything was neat, dusty, and still. My legs gave out, and I collapsed against the wall, my back pressing into the cold concrete, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My girlfriend hadn't imagined the sounds. I had heard them myself. Loud, angry thrashing. It was real. But nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. The police arrived shortly after. We walked them through everything, explained the timeline, showed them the texts, even let them watch some footage from the front yard camera. There was no sign of anyone entering or exiting. No forced entry. Nothing stolen. They told us to call if anything else happened. And then they left. For a while, things quieted down again. The basement remained untouched, and no further disturbances followed. It would have been easy to chalk it up to stress, imagination, or some strange environmental phenomenon. But deep down, I knew something had happened that night. Something that logic couldn't explain. We never found a solid answer. Nothing ever matched the level of intensity we felt that evening. The only thing that lingered was a vague discomfort, especially in the basement. We never used it after that. It became a place we avoided entirely, a silent zone beneath our feet. We filled it with storage bins and shut the door for good. But I couldn't forget the way the cat stared at that door. I couldn't unhear the chaos from beneath us. My girlfriend still brings it up sometimes in hushed tones, wondering aloud if we should have left the house right then and there. But life goes on. And so did we. A year later, we moved into a newer house, closer to the city, with better lighting and less history. But the old house never really left us. Sometimes, late at night, we still find ourselves wondering what was in the basement at night. I don't claim it was a ghost, or a demon, or anything specific. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is what we experienced. I know what I felt, and I know what I didn't see. Sometimes that's even scarier, because if there's one thing that night taught me, it's that not every presence makes itself visible. Not every haunting leaves a trace. Sometimes it's just noise and fear and the unsettling knowledge that something was there, and then wasn't. A disturbance that never needed to move anything to prove it existed. Just the sounds, just the cold, just the feeling that you're not alone in a place you thought was safe. Now, when people ask if I believe in the paranormal, I don't tell them this story. I just say I believe something's out there. That's all. I keep the rest to myself, because not everyone wants to know that even in a house filled with light and love and family memories, there can still be something else, something quiet and watching, waiting just below the surface. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, it'll remind you it's still there. Story 6. The fantasy that should have been a warning. It was a quiet night when my friend Marissa invited me to join her and her new boyfriend John to see the latest Star Wars movie. I had no real plans, and it had been a while since I saw Marissa, so I agreed. The theater was busy, buzzing with anticipation, but everything felt normal. John seemed like a perfectly average guy, nerdy, but kind. We chatted after the film about the characters, the plot twists, the special effects. He was enthusiastic, maybe a bit intense, but I chalked it up to being a fan. There were no red flags, no strange behavior, just a guy who liked movies. I went home thinking nothing more of it, but that would soon change. A few weeks passed, and when I met up with Marissa again, I casually asked if she was still seeing John. She looked down, hesitated for a moment, and then told me everything. And what she said chilled me. She told me about the night it all went wrong, They were hanging out in her room, watching a movie together, something they'd done a dozen times before. She was checking her phone when she noticed John fidgeting. He kept shifting around, looking at her, acting restless. When she asked him what was wrong, he shrugged it off at first. "Nothing," he said, but the way he kept glancing at her made her uneasy. She pressed again, concerned, asking him if he was okay, and that's when he said it. He looked her in the eyes and said, "I have this fantasy about you." At first she assumed it was something harmless, maybe romantic. They had been intimate before, after all, but the next words out of his mouth shattered that illusion in an instant. He said, "I want to take you into the woods, tie you to a tree. Then I want to rape you and cut off pieces of your flesh." When Marissa told me that, I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She described how he spoke those words like they were sacred to him, like he had rehearsed them in his mind 1,000 times. He was breathing heavily, trembling with excitement as he said it, completely unaware or uncaring of the horror spreading across her face. She was paralyzed for a moment, shocked into silence. This was real. She kicked him out of the house immediately and told him to never come back, but the nightmare didn't end there. For weeks afterward, she would see his car parked down the block. He would drive by slowly, watching the house. Sometimes he wouldn't even move, just sit there for hours. She started sleeping with a baseball bat next to her bed. As she told me this, I could see how scared she still was. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered with unease. I asked if she had reported him, and she admitted that she hadn't. She didn't have any proof, no texts, no recordings, just her word against his. She was afraid the police wouldn't take her seriously, and part of her feared that getting him arrested might make him snap, that he might really come back and act on that fantasy. It was terrifying to think about, because we've all met people like John, people who seem harmless, quiet, maybe a little awkward, but nothing more. We tell ourselves that real danger wears a mask, speaks loudly, gives itself away. But sometimes it sits next to you on the couch, smiling, holding your hand, waiting for the moment it feels safe to reveal its true self. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what she told me. How close she had come to something that could have ended her life. I thought about the camping trip they had planned for that very weekend. She had told me it was supposed to be with her family. What if they had gone? What if he had isolated her for just one moment in those woods? It was too awful to imagine. And it made me realize something that stays with me to this day. These kinds of people don't always act immediately. They wait. They calculate. They wear masks. And when they speak the truth, they test the waters to see if you'll flinch. Marissa's quick decision to kick him out may have saved her from something irreversible. We talked more over time, and she admitted how conflicted she still felt. She hated him, of course. She feared him. But a part of her kept questioning. What if he had just been fantasizing and never intended to do anything? What if it was just dark talk, nothing more? But that's the danger of normalization. The moment we start rationalizing extreme behavior is the moment we put ourselves at risk. No one says they're a monster out loud. They whisper it in passing. They dress it up in hypotheticals. They test your comfort. And then, when they sense no resistance, they inch forward. I told her she was right to act. That no one who speaks about harming someone like that should be allowed the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't just the words he said. It was the way he said them. The glee. The rush. The obvious arousal in describing such violence. That wasn't imagination. That was intent. Marissa eventually changed her number, deleted her social media for a while, and even took self-defense classes. Her parents, once they knew, installed cameras outside the house. There were no further sightings, no drive-bys, no confrontations, but we both knew he was still out there somewhere, possibly working a job, laughing with friends, seeming perfectly normal to the people who didn't know the darkness inside him. That was the scariest part of all, not knowing when or if he would ever act again, not just toward her, but toward someone else. I often wonder what became of him, if he found another target, if someone else welcomed his seemingly quiet personality without suspecting the shadows behind his words. And I wonder if he's waiting for another opportunity, another girl too polite to say no, too shocked to respond, too scared to act quickly. But I hope Marissa's story, and the way she handled it serves as a reminder that we have every right to protect ourselves, to draw the line, to trust that gut feeling that says, this is not okay. It's better to be cautious than to become a headline, better to ask the uncomfortable questions than to ignore the warning signs. So if you ever find yourself in the presence of someone who makes you feel unsafe, even if they smile, even if they pretend to be gentle, listen to that voice inside you. Don't dismiss it, because monsters don't always wear claws and fangs. Sometimes they come in the form of someone sitting beside you on movie night, telling you their fantasy in a tone that sends a chill through your bones. And sometimes, the scariest part of the story is knowing how close it came to never being told. Story 7. The Knife at the Gated Mansion. This happened nearly 10 years ago, but the images still haunt me as vividly as if it happened yesterday. At the time, I was a young man working part-time at a fuel station on a quieter road in southern England. The station was nestled between a sleepy village and a larger town connected by a ring road. The village itself was posh, high-end homes, imported cars, an air of hushed affluence that felt both exclusive and untouchable. It was the kind of place where everyone wore pressed shirts and whispered about hedge funds, where the only chain store was a Waitrose, and everything else was privately owned. I was always fascinated by the cars that would roll through, Aston Martins, Bentleys, Porsches, and among them, a regular customer stood out. His name was Michael. He was in his late 40s, always well dressed, polite to a fault, a man who exuded wealth without arrogance. Michael and I struck up casual conversations each time he stopped by. He wore designer watches, Rolexes, Omegas, and drove different luxury cars on different days. There was a quiet charisma about him, the kind of presence that made you feel you were speaking to someone who had everything figured out. He worked in finance, and I, an aspiring financier myself, always enjoyed our short chats. We talked markets, trends, even life goals. When I left that job for an apprenticeship with my uncle's brokerage firm, I hadn't expected to see Michael again, but fate had other plans. My uncle, in addition to running his brokerage and property investments, owned a few takeaway businesses for side income. Occasionally, when a delivery driver called out, I'd fill in. The main pizza joint we operated serviced, unsurprisingly, that same posh village. One summer evening, I was called in to make a delivery to an address on one of the most prestigious streets in the area. Homes on that road averaged well over £1 million each. Gated driveways, thick shrubbery for privacy, and houses set so far back they were practically hidden. As I pulled up to the heavy wooden gate, I buzzed the intercom. A muffled voice answered, and the gate slowly creaked open without another word. The driveway curved inward, flanked by manicured hedges, leading up to a grand Georgian-style home. Detached garage, gleaming windows, the kind of place you'd expect a member of parliament to live. As I approached the front door, I spotted a license plate I recognized Michael's. His distinct vanity tags were on 2 of the 3 luxury vehicles parked out front. I felt a spark of familiarity, a connection. I was delivering pizza to someone I knew, and for a brief moment, that made everything feel safer. But as the grand double doors opened, the comfort vanished instantly. Standing there wasn't Michael, or anyone I'd ever seen before. A man in his early 20s greeted me, shirtless, with a shaved head and a wiry frame. His jeans were filthy, his trainers worn down. There was something off about him. His eyes were hollow, his posture uneven, and he kept glancing behind him, as though he was hiding something. Bring the pizzas through to the kitchen, he said in a hoarse whisper, gesturing with one hand, while the other stayed suspiciously behind his back. I hesitated. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but the delivery was already made, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Still, I didn't move. Where's Michael? I asked cautiously. This is Michael's place, right? That's when things changed. The man's demeanor darkened. His expression tightened into something unreadable, and then he stepped forward just slightly, revealing what he was holding behind his back, a large kitchen knife. He looked me dead in the eyes and muttered a single word, "Run." I didn't wait. I dropped the pizza boxes onto the gravel and sprinted back toward the gate. My heart thundered in my chest, each step echoing like a gunshot in the quiet air. I could hear him behind me, his feet crunching on the gravel, gaining, I didn't dare look back. I reached the gate and began climbing. Wooden, thick, but mercifully without spikes. I pulled myself over and tumbled onto the pavement on the other side, scraping my arms, tearing my jeans, but I didn't stop running. I made it several blocks before finally ducking into a park, collapsing onto a bench, and pulling out my phone to call the police. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. When they arrived, one officer stayed with me, while the others returned to the property. I told them everything I could. The house, the man, the knife. At first I don't think they fully believed me. Their tone was skeptical, measured, like I was just another kid with a vivid imagination. But then my uncle arrived. He vouched for me, confirmed that I was on an official delivery, that the address was real, that the name on the order was Michael's. The officers nodded and went to investigate. When they returned, their expressions had changed. They didn't look skeptical anymore. They looked disturbed. The property, they said, was a mess. Inside, they found my car parked where I had left it, windows smashed, tires slashed. The kitchen was ransacked, furniture overturned, faces smeared on the walls. There were signs of forced entry, but no sign of the man I had encountered, just filth, damage, and a needle in one of the upstairs bathrooms. It was as if whoever had been there had simply vanished. The official report labeled it a squatter situation, but I knew better. This was someone looking to do harm, someone who knew enough to gain access to a gated mansion, enough to recognize opportunity, and enough to mask violence under the guise of an open door and a false invitation. Later, I learned that Michael and his family were out of the country, visiting relatives in Australia. They had no idea their home had been breached. No clue what had transpired in their absence. They returned to find their home in chaos, and their lives slightly fractured by the fear that something so invasive had happened in their sanctuary. I never worked another delivery shift after that. I couldn't. Every time I saw a large house with a hidden driveway, I felt my chest tighten. I imagined shadowy figures behind tall windows, whispered threats hiding behind intercom speakers. I had looked into the eyes of someone truly dangerous, and I had been told explicitly to run. To this day, I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't hesitated, if I had walked through that door into the kitchen, if I had asked fewer questions, if I had mistaken the knife for something else. It was a moment that changed how I viewed the world. I learned that danger doesn't always show up in dark alleys or stormy nights. Sometimes it hides in daylight, behind open gates, in the shadows of wealth and privilege. And sometimes the scariest people are the ones you never expect, standing barefoot in a mansion, whispering softly, holding a knife behind their back, and offering a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes. Story 8. The entity that followed us across states. There are some stories that don't start with a scream or a shadow, but with a feeling that something is watching, something is listening, something is there. This story isn't easy for me to tell. It's tangled and long, woven over years, and soaked in questions we never fully answered. I'm 26 now, and this started when I met my girlfriend, B. She's 22, and from the moment we began dating, I knew there was something different about the way she experienced the world. B sees things, hears things, describes visions in ways that make you shiver even if the room is warm. And while I've always believed in the paranormal on some level, I was also raised with a foot in logic. I wanted to understand it. I didn't want to fear it, but that resolve only lasted so long. After my divorce, I had moved back into my parents' house to reset my life and figure out my next steps. My children would visit on weekends, and B would spend her time with me in the basement-level living area that we had made into our own space. From the very beginning, B said something was off about the house. She never made a big deal out of it, but she'd grow tense in certain corners of the basement, flinch near the pantry door, or stare a little too long into darkened hallways. At first, we brushed it off. The basement had always been quiet, a bit chilly, but nothing more, until one afternoon when everything changed. B had gone into the bathroom. I was sitting on the bed when she stepped back into the room, looking pale and confused. "Why were you knocking?" she asked. I told her I hadn't moved. Her eyes widened. "You were asking to come in. It was your voice." That was the first moment I knew we weren't alone. "It was my voice," she said, soft. but urgent, repeating her name, asking to come inside the bathroom. But I'd been in bed, scrolling through my phone. There was no one else in the house at the time. Later, there were more events. The door to the bathroom being held shut from the outside while we both tried to leave, a cold twist of the handle in my hand, as though someone on the other side was refusing to let us out. Footsteps upstairs when no one was home. The cats, usually curious and playful, would freeze at the edge of doorways, staring into nothing, refusing to enter certain rooms. Bea began talking about two entities she had known since childhood. One she called the Tub Man, the other, the Nose Guy. Strange names, strange visions, but described with an eerie consistency that made them feel disturbingly real. The Tub Man appeared half submerged in bathtubs, with red shoes and long limbs. He never showed his face fully, never moved toward her, just crawled in like a spider, slowly. The Nose Guy, on the other hand, was worse. He wasn't even shaped like a person, just a large, pulsating nose-shaped thing that breathed, observed, and left her frozen with fear. These were not dreams. She saw them while fully awake. She had seen them since she was a child, but now they seemed to be growing stronger, clearer, and more present. One night, while I was at work, she texted me in a panic, "There's someone in the chair." I raced home. She described a woman, gaunt, pale, with long wispy hair and an unnaturally large smile, just sitting in my computer chair, watching her in silence. The woman never spoke, never moved, just stared. It wasn't long after that we took a trip to Michigan with the rest of the family. My sister stayed behind to watch the house and feed the pets. When Bea and I returned, it was late. We were unloading the car and she ran inside first. As I stood outside under the darkening sky, I felt it, that heavy, dreadful feeling that you're being watched. Not by a neighbor or passerby, but something unseen. I turned toward the back of the house and saw nothing, but the sensation wouldn't leave. I rushed inside, closing the door behind me. Bea met me in the hallway. Before I could say anything, she whispered, "It's watching us," from the kitchen window. The exact spot I had felt the eyes from. A moment later, one of our cats, normally skittish but not fearful, sat frozen in front of the window, eyes locked on that same corner, not blinking, not moving. We asked my sister how the house had been while we were away. She seemed hesitant, but admitted that she hadn't left her bedroom much. She too had felt watched. She pointed to the very same window without prompting. She said she kept the door closed, ignored the footsteps, and only went out when absolutely necessary. Later, we caught our youngest daughter, during one of her weekend visits, standing in the darkened kitchen, just staring into the void above the sink. When asked what she was doing, she simply said she was with More, a term for my mother, but my mother wasn't home. The girl had locked herself inside my parents' bathroom and closet. When Bea found her, she had tear-streaked cheeks and a blank expression, unable to explain how she got there or why. Things escalated after that. One of our cats would repeatedly get locked inside closets that no one used. Doors would close and open on their own. Bea began having waking dreams, visions of the smiling woman walking through the house, standing at the end of the bed, or lifting her head slowly above bathroom stalls in public rest stops. That last vision happened while we were on a long-distance drive. We had stopped at a rest area in Wisconsin. I came out first and waited near the vending machines. Bea came out moments later, pale and shaken. She told me she had gone into the first restroom, but inside, standing behind one of the stalls, was the woman again, lifting her head above the divider like something out of a nightmare. That was the second time she had seen her in full form. The first time had been back in our house in my chair. That night in the car, driving toward Pasco, Washington, Bea began to cry. She said she couldn't take it anymore, that if all of this was real, if every shadow, every vision, every presence was truly happening, then she didn't want to live in a world like that. I tried to reassure her, but deep down I was scared too, because I had seen things now. I had heard the voices. I had felt the cold, weightless pressure of something sitting on my chest when I was alone. These weren't her delusions. We were both inside this now, and the fact that this presence had followed us from state to state, from house to highway to rest stop, meant it wasn't just attached to a location, it was attached to us. We still live together. We still travel for work. We still sleep with a light on most nights. But things aren't like they used to be. I don't roll my eyes at ghost stories anymore. I don't laugh when people say they feel watched. And I certainly don't assume safety just because the room is familiar. I don't know what's following us. I don't know if it's the woman, the tub man, or something else, but I know it's still out there, somewhere, waiting, watching. And sometimes, when Bia's asleep and I'm staring at the hallway outside our bedroom, I swear I can see her too, the smiling woman, pale and still, and I pray that she never decides to step closer. Story 9. The crawling thing in the motel room. It was meant to be a simple weekend getaway. My partner and I had both been overwhelmed with work, deadlines stacking up like bricks in our minds, so we decided to escape the city for a few days and booked a small roadside motel near a quiet forested lake in northern Wisconsin. The place wasn't fancy, just a modest 2-story building with 10 rooms and a flickering neon sign that buzzed in the evening silence. It felt like something out of a road trip movie, with peeling paint and a sleepy clerk at the front desk who handed over our key with a yawn. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and despite the motel's age, there was something peaceful about it. No traffic, no cell signal, just crickets, wind, and the rustle of trees swaying in the night. We were placed in room 7, a corner unit with 2 small windows, both of which overlooked the thick tree line behind the motel. Inside, the room was clean but sparse. A bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a TV that looked like it hadn't worked since the 90s. We unpacked, cracked open a couple of drinks, and settled in for the night. As the sun dipped below the trees, the motel grew eerily quiet, like sound itself had taken a breath. Around midnight, I woke up to use the bathroom. The room was pitch dark, and the bathroom light switch was outside the door. As I reached for it, I thought I heard something, soft, faint, almost like a whisper sliding beneath the doorframe. I froze, hand hovering in the air, suddenly unsure whether it had been a sound or just my imagination. I flipped the switch and quickly stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The small bathroom mirror was cracked near the top corner, and the fan buzzed weakly when I turned it on. I did what I came in to do, then paused before opening the door again. That uneasy feeling had returned, wrapping around me like static. I cracked the door open and peeked into the room. Nothing had changed. My partner was still sleeping, the curtains still drawn, but the atmosphere felt heavier, denser somehow. I climbed back into bed and closed my eyes, telling myself it was just the strangeness of an unfamiliar place. But then came the sound again. A soft scrape, like nails dragging across the carpet. My eyes shot open, and I held my breath. It was coming from beneath the bed. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just lay there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake my partner. The sound came again, slow, rhythmic, almost thoughtful. Not scurrying like a mouse, not creaking like old pipes. This was deliberate. A slow, dragging movement, inching closer to my side of the bed. I wanted to believe it was some kind of animal, but every instinct told me otherwise. I reached out slowly, gently shaking my partner awake. They stirred, mumbling, but as soon as I whispered, "Something's under the bed," they froze. We lay there, both wide awake now, listening together as the dragging sound stopped completely. Silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like something was holding its breath with us. After what felt like an eternity, we built up the courage to turn on the lamp. The room flooded with weak yellow light, and instantly, everything looked normal again. The silence remained, but the heaviness lifted slightly. I knelt at the side of the bed and slowly peeked underneath. Nothing. Just empty space, our bags, and the shadows cast by the nightstand. My partner did the same on their side. Nothing. We both exhaled, trying to laugh it off, but it came out strained, nervous. Maybe we were just tired, we told ourselves. Maybe the stress had followed us here and twisted our minds. We left the light on and finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next day, we went hiking by the lake, trying to distract ourselves and push the night's events out of our minds. By the time we returned to the motel, we had mostly convinced ourselves it had been nothing. But when we walked through the door of room 7, Something was different. The pillows on the bed were flipped. Our bags had been moved. And a long, jagged scratch stretched across the surface of the wooden nightstand. Fresh, deep, and unmistakably deliberate. Neither of us had done it. No one had access to the room while we were gone. The manager said he never entered any rooms without permission and claimed he had been busy fixing a pipe near the front office all day. We believed him. But if he didn't go inside, then who or what did? That night, the air in the room turned icy. The heater clicked on and off erratically, and the lights flickered every time we tried to turn them off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up gasping. I couldn't move. My body was locked, paralyzed. My eyes darted around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then I saw it. At the foot of the bed, crouched low to the ground, was a figure. Pale, long limbs, its arms stretched out in front of it, fingers splayed like they were tasting the carpet. Its head was tilted sideways, and I couldn't see its eyes, only the impression of a face twisted in something that was not quite a smile, but not quite a snarl either. It began crawling, slowly, silently, up the side of the bed. I couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. The figure stopped inches from my face. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just stared, as though deciding something. My chest tightened. My mind screamed. And then just like that, it was gone. I could breathe again. I jolted upright, waking my partner. I described what I saw, and their face turned white. They had dreamed of the same thing, down to the crawling, the pale skin, the horrible stillness. We didn't sleep again that night. At first light, we packed our bags and left without even asking for a refund. We didn't speak during the drive back. There was nothing to say that would make any of it make sense, but we both knew something had followed us into that room. Something that was still there, waiting for the next guest to arrive. To this day, we don't know what it was. A ghost? A demon? A fragment of tortured memories imprinted into that space. I've tried researching the motel since, but it's no longer listed online. No reviews, no mentions. Like it was erased. Maybe it burned down. Maybe someone decided the place held too many bad dreams, or maybe it still stands, its flickering neon light calling out to new travelers. And maybe, just maybe, that crawling thing is still inside room 7, waiting for nightfall, waiting for the sound of breathing to tell it someone new has come to visit.